Aloha, good morning. I was supposed to be teaching today with Success World One. I've been teaching a holistic medicine theory class and herbal remedies course. I have been uploading those classes as I get them to this YouTube channel too. So you guys have access to that. But today, class was canceled. I had prepared a curriculum. The coursework is 1 hour of coursework. I'm not going to talk for an hour today, but I'm just going to maybe highlight some of the topics that we'll be discussing the next time I teach class. I teach every Thursday. However, I will not be teaching on June 16th, so I'll be back the following Thursday. The past few classes, we've been talking a little bit about Hawaiian herbs, Hawaiian medicine, animism, indigenous tribal practices, in regards to healing and traditional practices. Today's coursework, I had planned on talking a little bit about Western herbs. And when I speak of Western herbalism, I am speaking more of European Western um, herbal medicine. So when I speak of Eastern, we're speaking more of, say, Ayurveda or in Indian medicine or, say, Chinese medicine. And when I speak of Western, I'm speaking of Western European. And then when I'm speaking of indigenous medicines, then I would be speaking more of, uh, you know, traditional indigenous practices, which could be anywhere from Native American to South American to, Hawaiian to indigenous tribes in Europe, or tribes all over the globe, right? So prior to the current model that we see in the world, when we were tribal hunting and gathering societies, we had our different practices that have carried over and been carried over through oral tradition, dance and song, and the shamanic practices were carried down from generation to generation, although they may not have been written down. I did want to, you know, as far as writing goes, I know when I was talking about Hawaiian culture, I did spend, 25 years over there and was in the rainforest and worked with the kahuna. I did mention about the meles and the chanting and the singing practices and the dance as far as passing down information and the stories, but also there were Hawaiian petroglyphs. So I don't want to leave out the petroglyphs were, picture writing, and you could find them all over the island in stone. They're in the lava rock and different places. So you can see these petroglyphs that also tell stories. I wanted to just mention that. When we left off last week, I was speaking, we were talking about stories, different experiences I had had, and the art of storytelling as being a way to convey messages and information. I talked about archetypal imagery and how it has a universal connotation to it. Oftentimes, these archetypes or these pictures are universally understood, not in all cultures, but in many cultures. They convey the same emotion or feeling, and so we are able to communicate universally more so with pictures than with language. Language is very limiting, so I did speak of that a bit. We talked a little bit about energy and energetics. And, herbs have ideas of energetics. There's energetic principles in herbs, traditionally in herbology, when we're talking about traditional medicine systems. When I say traditional, I mean non-allopathic, non-current, modern medical understanding of systems, but energetic systems and how they play in our health and well-being. Oftentimes they're associated with elementals, and I would say, Chinese acupuncture has a system that they think of when they're thinking about elements like fire, metal, water, earth. Ayurveda has these energies. They're thinking about ether, air, earth, fire, water. Chinese system has wood. Um, and then, in the European system, there are the humors, which are these energetic principles. Very interesting. Um, for example, turmeric, which is an adaptogen. So I was going to get into adaptogens in my coursework. I'm not going to go too far into that today, but an adaptogen is just an herb that kind of balances the hormonal system of the body. So has universal application as far as bringing the whole body into balance. And there's an idea that when the whole body is in balance, then the body experiences this optimal health. So that you're indirectly treating imbalances through or imbalances or say ailments or illness by bringing the body into balance. And by bringing the body in balance, you're allowing the body to heal itself as opposed to trying to target an affliction, if that makes sense. So I'm going to be speaking of that in my next class, because if we get into that, it gets quite complex. I will be also speaking of various properties of herbs. So some would be, examples would be a nervine. A nervine is something that settles the nervous system, something like a valerian root or a passion flower. These are for settling the nervous system. We have a menagogic, which is having to do with blood. I have my list and I'm trying to think of everything, and I don't want to put my glasses on. So I'm trying to remember everything. It's been a while since I've used all of the terminology. But I was going to be getting into how to extract herbs, whether through infusions, decoctions. I was going to be talking about emulsions and just getting into some of the specifics of herbs and how to make use of them. And of course, in herbs, we use the root. In some plants, we use the root, the stem, the flower, the leaves. It depends on the herb that we're using, but say for like turmeric, which I talk about turmeric a lot because it is an adaptogen, it is a potent blood cleaner, it is kind of a universal herb in the sense that it works really well to kind of balance out and heal all things, not necessarily because of, say, an antibacterial function or an anti-fungal application, which it does have those properties to it, but also because it allows the body to help heal itself through its adaptogenic abilities. So we're going to get into that in the next coursework. But last class I was talking a lot about some of the stories, some Hawaiian stories, some of my own personal Hawaiian stories, some of how we look to nature, especially in a system that's based on animism and the idea of animal spirits and water spirits and earth spirits and these energetic forces that we see in nature. And so in a true practice as an herbalist in this sort of mindset, you do connect with nature and almost have a sense of a communication through nature. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about these sort of extrasensory perceptions and skills that we can develop or that we may be born with, that I think science sort of disregards. Although I did, my graduate work was in behavior science, an education, but also with an emphasis in autism. So I did have a lot of neuroscience. And I was specifically very interested in sensory perception and how we process information in the brain. And so I did write a paper that I'm going to try to publish in a journal, I think. I did write a paper on ASD and amplified pain syndrome. So there was a case study of a 15-year-old who continually kept going back to the doctors, and she just had this pain, and they could find no reason for the pain, but the pain was amplified when she was around other people, and it diminished greatly when she was alone. Now, was it related to social anxiety? They weren't able to necessarily distinguish that. It is possible that she was just picking up on their pain. We do have some senses that we've learned to shut down over time, because I think in the modern world, if we hadn't evolved, devolved, I don't know which one it is, but if we hadn't sort of shut down these senses, we would probably not be able to really function in the modern world, because there's so much external stimuli that our senses are bombarded with, right, on a daily basis. Just getting into a car is super overstimulating to our nervous system. So my theory and idea is that there's a percentage of the population that has shut down a lot of these extras, what we consider to be extrasensory perceptions, which my thinking is that they're not actually extrasensory. They're actually probably normal, or were normal human senses that over time, due to the changes that we've had in our experience as far as our modern lifestyle, have learned to shut down. And so fewer and fewer humans are being born with those senses or perceptions. And some are, and those individuals struggle. I was born with the ability to sense things, to see things that other people didn't see, which is called clairvoyance. There is clairvoyance, clairsentience, clairaudience, and claircognizance, which is clear knowledge or clear knowing, where you get information. Some people call it downloads. I don't want to go off too far into this idea of esoteric unseen, but it is unseen, and people do experience these things. And I do think that as humans, these may have been senses that we did use much more frequently when we were in more of a hunting gathering culture, that we have since these things have atrophied in a way because we don't employ their use anymore. We've become very cerebral. We've become very thinking and very much dependent on our eyesight, and have sort of shut down some of these other senses. But I believe, and I've done my share of hunting out in the middle of nowhere, that we tune into other senses when we are in the natural world. That my sense of smell becomes very heightened and strong, is very heightened and strong. And the more we employ the use of that sense, of course, the better it is, right? Um, Yeah, if that makes sense. We kind of train our senses to perceive. But I think about, like, say, the hammerhead sharks that hunt on like infrared energy, or bird migration patterns that pick up on electromagnetic energy, right? So there's these energies that are unseen, maybe to our eye. That doesn't mean that we can't pick up on them. And again, archetypal information is information that comes in pictures. Um, So I will share a story, and I'm going to share it. And it was a story I wanted to share last week in my coursework in Success World 1. Uh, so I did some work with Jim Channon. And if you're not familiar with Jim Channon, he is the individual who the film Men Who Stare at Goats was based on. He was an army. He was in the army. I'm trying to remember his rank. I can't off the top of my head. But you look him up and you can see it. But he was in charge of the Psychic Secret Service during the Vietnam War, and they made a movie called Men Who Stare at Goats. But they were really spending a lot of time working on remote viewing, psychic abilities, extrasensory perception, and trying to build this psychic secret service that would use these tools and skills to in combat situations, but also was part of peaceful combat, I guess. His ultimate goal was really this New Earth Army, this New Earth Battalion. He lived in Kohala on the big island of Hawaii, and we did some work together. So I started my last class talking about how I used to have a lot of visions as a child and shut them down because I grew up in the West and they scared me. And I went through Catholic school and I figured it was all from the devil and it was demonic and it scared me. So I shut it down. But I didn't stop bringing in or being in tune to that energy. I just could no longer see it. I no longer had visions. But what ended up happening was that I began to feel it in my body, which reminds me very much of the study, the case study that I was researching on the girl who was feeling pain and getting sick when she was in the presence of other people. And so for years I thought I was just really sick and was seeking help because I was always in pain. I was always sick. I didn't know why I felt so terrible. There was nothing physically wrong with me. So Jim did work with me. And I remember one time we were sitting and he wanted me to scan him and look at him and tell him what I saw. And I didn't want to look. I remember not wanting to look. I didn't see, but I could sense. And my sense was that it wasn't something I wanted to see. And I started to cry. And he said, look, just look. And I looked. And actually what I saw behind him was a Grim Reaper. And it really scared me, right? Because that's death, right? In death, when we talk about death in the esoteric sense, we're talking about death as new beginning. But I didn't get the sense that this was new beginning. This felt very ominous to me. And I told him, and he said, well, what do you see? And I just started crying. And he said, well, what do you see? And I said, well, death. And he laughed and he said, oh, I'm in great shape. I'm fine. I'm good. There's nothing wrong with me. And so I was like, well, maybe it means new beginnings. Maybe, it was very intense. Anyway, flash forward to the next day. And again, I had been really starting to understand that a lot of the things that I felt in my body weren't mine. They were other people. Maybe I had made little like soul contracts with for healing work, something like that. I don't want to get too far off into that because I am a scientist too. So, but I'm an ordained minister and I've seen some things and experienced some things. So it's that blending of worlds, right? Yeah. So I was walking and I started to feel this sort of stabbing pain in my chest. And I could barely breathe. And I didn't know what it was. And I called Jim and I said, I don't know. He's like, look at it. Look at it. Look what it is. Look at it. I said, hey, my first reaction was, have you had your heart checked? Did you have your heart? Has anything ever happened to your heart? Do you have an issue with your heart? Is there a problem? Because I'm feeling it in my heart, right? I'm feeling this chest pain. No, he says, my heart's fine. There's nothing wrong with my heart. I did remember saying, I think that you should probably get your heart checked. I think you probably should check your heart. He said, my heart's fine. My heart's fine. There's no problem with my heart. Okay. He said, look at it, look at the picture, look at the picture. I think it was twofold, it was a twofold vision. So I looked, and he said, what is it? I said, I see just darkness. I see black. I see black. I see wind. I see wind. It's dark, but I see this whole, this like, it's almost like there's flesh and there's wind. There's wind, and because I said, was it a broken rib? Was it a this? No. Oh, he said, sucking chest wound. Could it be a sucking chest wound? And I said, yes. That's exactly what it is. It's sucking chest wound. And he said, well, the first person that died when I was at war died in my arms. And it was a black man who was shot and died from a sucking chest wound. That kind of blew my mind a little bit. I realized what happened, energetically speaking. So this is where I don't want to get into this idea of these like entities or this or that, but again, energy exists and is real. Similar energies attract similar energies. Like attracts like. Emotions, emoting, is energy. We emote energy. The energy that was being emoted was trauma, tragedy, sorrow, darkness, right? Sadness. And so the conclusion I came to was that in the battlefield, there was like, he could not let go of this energy, properly process this energy, because, you have to really move and you can't be in harm's way. You just have to get out of there. You can't sit and process your emotions and release and let go of them. So that as this soldier was leaving his body and departing, that energy kind of stuck. Sometimes energy gets stuck. In Ayurveda, they'll call it dross, D-R-O-S-S. It's a dark, when you look at somebody energetically, when you do healing work, you clean out the dark spaces. The sticky, dark spaces is the best way I can explain it. So that gets stuck. So that energy, unless we're moving and clearing these energies out of our space, these emotions that get stuck, they build and they get larger and larger and larger and accumulate. So that my best guess was that there was some deep sorrow and anger around the death of this soldier that had never been released. But it was twofold, because Jim died of a heart attack a year later. I had been bugging him to go get checked. I think he went and saw an acupuncturist at one point. I had told him I really felt that there was something going on with his heart, but he kind of laughed it off. Yeah. So that's a thing. It's interesting. People want to have psychics look at them. People want energy healers to work with them, to look at them. But if you don't, maybe follow through, take that information, and follow up on it, it's not going to do you a whole lot of good. So there's that. That's an interesting story. And that's a true story. And I'm going to leave that here today. 2 weeks from now, Success World 1, I will get into more of the technicalities of herbs, a lot of terminology. And then, as I go through this coursework, I will be doing some demos of some medicine making and things like that. So I'm going to leave y'all with that. And aloha, and have a wonderful, magical day. And I guess that's it. Be blessed.